Listen carefully.
The first sign that the highway wanted blood was the deer standing in the center lane, unblinking in the high beams, steam unrolling from its nostrils into rain. Leah swerved their van into the rumble strip, and the deer didn't move, head lifting too slowly, eyes reflecting a silver coin of moon that didn't exist. Henry laughed, shaky, turning the wipers up. "Welcome to the night shift." The radio lost the station mid-chorus and gave them a whisper instead. "Exit 13. They hadn't seen an exit in miles, and the odometer clicked a number Leah didn't like. The sky felt lower in that part of the state. Pines leaned closer as if to eavesdrop. A blue highway sign bloomed out of the wet. Gas food cabin. The cabin part seemed handwritten, the letters bleeding like someone had scrawled them on the metal with a marker in the rain. Henry's phone died at 62% the moment he tried maps. Leah saw at first EX13 in a broken green glare, the arrow pointing to a ramp that looked more like a wound in the asphalt. They slid down into dark trees, the van's headlights snagging on a swarm of white posts, homemade crosses. Henry muttered a prayer he didn't believe anymore. The gas station at the bottom was a box of yellow light with a single pump and a man behind glass who watched them without moving. The bell didn't ring when they opened the door. "Cabin?" the man asked, as if they'd said it. "It's always the cabin." They bought a map because the register screen insisted, a paper thing that smelled like mold and pine tar. The roads on it didn't match anything Leah had ever seen. The clerk's name tag read "Almost." "Storm knocked the highway out," he said, though they hadn't seen down trees. "People take the forest road to wait it out. Safe there." He didn't blink until they left. The bell rang when the door closed, late by several breaths. The forest road was mud with ambition, pulling at the tires. Every mile marker was black paint over something else. The rain quit like someone turned a dial, and the silence it left wasn't empty. It was crowded with listening. The cabin appeared with its porch light already on. Log walls glistened like wet bones. Inside, a table, a potbelly stove, 4 pegs for coats, 2 bed frames with thin quilts. On the stove, someone had left a cast iron pan warm enough to steam in the cold. Henry put his keys on the table and they rolled, as if the surface was crooked. Leah noticed the Polaroids nailed to the far wall. Each showed the same cabin from just outside the window, taken at night, light on, 2 shadows inside. The last photo looked like tonight. One of the shadows held up a hand just like she did, palm pressing the glass. Henry laughed again because the alternative was screaming, and found a guest book. The signatures crawled down pages. Margot and Dean, winter of '98. Police Chief Halvorsen, spring of '6. Leah and Henry, tonight. She hadn't written that. The entry had her slanted R's, Henry's block H. "This is what happens with small towns," Henry said, voice too bright. "They do bits." He closed the book, hand shaking, and the radio in the van woke on its own. Voice pushed through thin cabin walls. "Exit 13. Then, more softly, stay put." Then, softer still. So soft, Leah had to lean toward the door to hear, "Don't open it." 80. The knock came anyway. Not a fist. Fingers. Many of them. Curious, testing the grain. Henry whispered, "Forest raccoons," the way a child whispers monster and hopes the sheets protect him. The porch light hummed, flickered, went brighter. The window showed them only their reflections standing in a twin cabin where people looked like them but weren't as steady. Leah saw her own mouth form. "Don't open it," and realized the reflection was late by a breath. The second knock had weight. The third came from the back door that hadn't been there until they looked. Leah crossed the room, the floorboards counting her steps. She put her ear to the seam and heard road noise, tires hissing on wet interstate. She smelled heat from brake pads. The voice behind the door was small and wrong. "You swerved," it said. "We went into the trees." She remembered the deer's eyes, how they had reflected a moon that wasn't there, how Henry had laughed because the alternative was panic. how the van had yawned toward a forest that leaned in to listen. She remembered, suddenly, the sound not even the rain had masked, the crunch of a bumper-hugging bark, the breathless silence just after impact. A fourth knock, softer. We'll be later next time. The voice coaxed. Open up and make it easier. Henry reached for the knob like a sleepwalker. Leah grabbed his wrist and squeezed. We already opened it, she said, not sure why until the gas station bell rang in her head, late by several breaths. The door wasn't an exit. There was an echo. If they opened it again, they wouldn't stay to leave fingerprints on the guest book. They'd join the hands in the Polaroids, pressed forever against wet glass, warning the next them to stay put. The stove went cold in an instant, like the cabin was done pretending warmth. The porch light went out. In the dark, the crosses up the road began to gleam, pale lines drifting near like beached fish skeletons finally remembering tide. Leah pulled Henry into the corner away from the windows. The radio whispered, closer now, not through static but through wood grain.
Exit 13 again.
Exit 13, it said. Again. At dawn, there was no dawn. Just the sound of the highway like a river they would never reach. The guestbook page had new names, cramped underneath theirs. Leah and Henry, again. When the knock returned, it came from the front this time, polite, as though someone arrived. Eyes wide, map in hand, rain in their hair. Leah folded the useless map like a flag and understood the only mercy the place offered was this. If you didn't open the door, the next them would, and they'd take your place by the window. She took Henry's hand as the knob turned from the other side, and the cabin sighed in relief, ready for fresh ghosts.
Amar, can you hear me? Layla, what was that?
They'd promised no more night driving after Amar's lane drifted twice, but the highway between the mountains made promises into jokes. Lila watched the white dashes unspool like stitches in a wound the night couldn't heal. The CB radio they bought at a truck stop to feel old school skittered with voices. Any takers on a heads up for mile marker black? Someone asked, and someone else said, not again. Layla leaned forward. What's mile marker black? Silence answered, thick as moss. Fog arrived like a planned ambush. Headlights threw a wall of white back at them. Amar slowed, flashers ticking. The next sign had no number, just a painted rectangle where the miles should be. It was black, gloss, still wet. The drip lines crusted toward the gravel. Turnout, Lila said, spotting a Forest Service road. The entrance had two reflectors, but one was dead, like an eye punched out. The trees absorbed the van, pines pressed in, and the fog thinned under their arms to a quiet with no highway hum. 5 minutes in, they saw the cabin. Ranger design, square, government plane, porch with a chain across it and a sign that said closed for season. The door was unlocked. The inside smelled like coffee and old paper. A map on the wall had a circle in red grease pencil around a section of the highway labeled in someone's handwriting. Black Mile. A logbook waited, plastic pen tied to it. Entries were short and professional until they weren't. Lights and fog do not stop. One ranger had written, calls know your name, do not answer. Another entry from last winter. They followed me back. They do the voices good. Lila's throat went dry. She heard her own voice in the CB speaker then, laughing, the way she had back near the truck stop when a man with a belt buckle big as a hubcap told them not to drive this section at night. She heard herself say, we're not superstitious. And then, over that recording of herself, another voice with her exact timbre whispering, Amar, help. Amar spun the volume down, but the cabin had already heard. The phone on the wall rang. Layla picked it up like an idiot, because the reflex lives longer than the brain, and heard wind, and then a child's low sob. Mama? It said. She didn't have children. The sob became a giggle because someone behind it wanted to practice. Mama. It tried again, better this time, and then in her own voice, perfect. Amar, help. Battery jump? A new voice asked from the porch. Boots on wood. The chain lay in a neat curve on the floor like a shed skin. Amar shook his head. "We're fine," he called. And the answer came from the CB and the wall phone and the crack between boards near the baseboard all at once. "We're fine." The thing on the porch didn't test the knob. It didn't need to. It could push its shape through the gaps. Time had chewed in the cabin and wear a ranger's jacket and a badge that said Ortega and the smell of wet wool and pine smoke, because smell is just memory with teeth. "Highway's closed," it said in Ranger Ortega's tone. Layla saw the photograph of Ortega on the bulletin board. A smiling woman squinting against snow glare. "Had a death," it went on, placing a steaming mug of coffee on the counter that hadn't been there before. It wore a face with Ortega's dimple, but the eyes didn't know where to stop when they looked at you. "We'll put you up in the bunk. First light, we'll run you through." The bunk room had 3 cots, and the sadness that institutions leave behind like blanket lint. Layla did not sit. She watched the window glass sweat with their breath and something else's. Amar rubbed his eyes. "Maybe we should just..." He didn't finish because the CB crackled with a voice that had always meant danger to him. His father, dead 5 years, speaking in a calm he'd heard only at hospitals. "Amar," the radio said. "Come outside." He went 2 steps before Lila's hand caught his sleeve. "It's not him."
"It's not him,"
she said, and the radio took her voice. "It's not him." The thing wore the words back at them, laughter tucked inside like a blade. They ran for the van. The forest road didn't remember giving itself to them before. It was longer now, steeper, shoulders eroded into shadow. The fog met them at the edge like an agreement. Mile marker black waited with its paint still wet. In the hot gloss, Lila saw a smear where a hand had slid. She recognized her own fingerprints not by shape, but by guilt. The highway became a river of red eyes. Layla merged into the flow like prayer. The CB screamed 3 channels at once. "Left lane, left, left! And we've got a jackknife up ahead!" And under it all, a thing that has never driven anything whispering, "Home." They passed a wreck that hadn't happened yet. A semi on its side, the trailer's ribs showing. A whirl of paper dancing in the road like birds. Amar gripped the wheel hard enough to go white at the knuckles. "Don't look," Lila said. She couldn't help herself. She looked. The papers were ranger forms. The names on them were theirs. The AM, PM, clock in the dash hiccuped to 0, 0, and stayed there. The black mile wouldn't end. They passed the same signage 3 times, blue service sign, exit call out to a town they'd never heard of, church billboard, promising hope until Layla understood they weren't moving forward. They were being watched, moving backward by something that wanted to see what fear did to posture. When the deer stepped into the lane, it had too many eyes. When the police cruiser appeared in the mirror, its light bar didn't spin. The lights watched, unblinking. When the next ranger cabin showed up, identical to the last, it already had their van out front. The porch light clicked on. They stopped without deciding to. Lila braced for the same face, the same badge. Instead, the person who opened the door was Lila, older by a night that felt like a year. She held the logbook out like a Bible.
"It's you."
"Don't sign," older Layla said. "Don't acknowledge it. It needs your handwriting to keep you." Behind her, older Amar scribbled their names anyway, because people always want to prove they were here. The Black Mile feeds on record. CB recordings, logbooks, painted signs. Your own voice played back to you until your throat forgets which syllables were original. Layla took the pen from older Layla and set it on the porch where the rain could get it. Then she stepped back. Then she closed the van door. The highway accepted the sound like an offering. They drove until the fog grew bored. Dawn arrived with a weak shrug. A real mile marker appeared, white, with a number that meant they'd put the worst behind them. The CB died. The phone in the cabin they'd left began to ring and would ring for hours. The logbook flipped its own pages in a draft. On the black paint of the old mile marker, fingerprints dried, and if you counted them, you could tell exactly how many times the thing had practiced you.
"I'm watching."
The first letter came on a wet night, when the streetlights hummed and rain tracked down the uncurtained windows like claw marks. The couple had just hauled in the last moving box, still dizzy from the smell of fresh paint and damp cardboard, when the new mailbox sighed open and shut in the wind. He found in the stack an envelope with block letters and no return address. To the new owner. Inside, the sentences crawled like ants under the skin. I have been watching the house. My grandfather watched. My father watched. Now it is my time. The letter listed details too specific to be guessed. The color of the daughter's bike, the potted plant on the sill, the song from the playlist echoing through the foyer as they worked. "Do you need to fill the house with young blood?" I requested. It asked, as if a contract had already been signed in a language only the house understood. After that, the house began to breathe differently, slow and shallow, like something unseen was listening. The second letter arrived before they slept there once. It knew nicknames, schedules, even the exact spot where the wife lingered on the landing to admire the banister curve. A porch light fizzed. A motion detector blinked at nothing. A shadow stood too long at the far end of the sidewalk and then smudged away when the husband stepped out and said, "Hello?" into the drizzle. They checked the locks twice, then 3 times. He replaced the deadbolt with a commercial-grade cylinder. She placed bells on interior doors, a string of tiny chimes that would whisper if anything moved at night. They didn't move in. How could they? They sat in lawn chairs in the empty living room one afternoon, listening to the house's settling bones, trying to decide whether fear was rational or a trick of suggestion. The radiator ticked. Outside, a jogger paused at the property line and tied a shoe as if taking inventory. When the letter writer called the house hungry, it felt less like metaphor and more like a ritual sentence passed down with a deed. Police were called, of course. The officers were patient, practical. They suggested cameras, a neighborhood watch, common sense. The neighbors came by with casseroles and a thick silence. Everyone was kind. Everyone's eyes flicked past the corners, the hedges, the dormers. The couple toured the block after dinner, noting porches with perfect sight lines, windows that faced their children's bedrooms. A prank, some said. Envy, said another. Zoning dispute, whispered one, though no one could say what grievance would wear such an ancient voice. They rented the house rather than keep it empty. Weeks passed. Then a renter found an envelope, its ink smudged by weather. The writer's tone now mocking, as if delighted the house had 2 different households and still no heartbeat to lull it to sleep. "Why won't you come?" The writer asked about the basement, about a corner under the stairs where the air felt colder even on July afternoons. "I will know when you move your bed," it said. "I will know when you sleep." Nights turned viscous. The watch became reciprocal. They watched the house that watched them. They learned the sounds, pipes, fridge, a branch against glass, and still could not explain the low, patient scrape they heard from the attic, as if someone were tracing the pitch of the roof from fingertips. He went up with a flashlight, throat dry. Dust motes lifted and fell like snow and stale air. No footprints, no nest, just the old beams, the dark. He stood very still and realized the house was so quiet that his heart sounded foreign here. Investigators tried a new angle. Handwriting, postmarks, rumors crystallized around fences like frost. If the writer was close, the writer knew when lights went on, when curtains opened, when the kids played on the sidewalk, chalking hopscotch onto the world. On a foggy morning, he found a letter builder's detail he'd missed before. The writer had used a local phrase only people on that street use for a particular corner. It wasn't proof, it was scent. The twist was that there was no twist, no unmasking, no confession, no courtroom finale that could file the edges of the fear down to some manageable superstition. The family sold, at a loss and with a weariness that felt physical, like a flu. A later owner reported no letters at all. The house returned to its old heartbeat, stubborn and unbothered, as if the ritual had chosen not the structure but the prospect of a certain family's terror. Sometimes the wife drives past on school day mornings and slows just enough to see the porch. The mailbox is ordinary. The curtains are ordinary. All the horror is in the fact that whoever wrote those letters could still be on a porch somewhere, head cocked, counting steps as a stranger carries groceries across a lawn, smiling at the private knowledge that a home can feel loved and hunted in the same breath. The first postcards were crude, almost childish black block letters, accusations slashed like scratches and bark. Circleville, Ohio seemed like the kind of place where secrets stayed small and close to the chest. The letters blew them up to billboard size. "We know what you did." The messages named names, places, times, as if the writer had a seat at every table. A school bus driver began receiving them, accusations that crawled into her home and coiled on the doormat. Her husband got them too. Neighbors, colleagues. The writers seemed to be everywhere, and no one, as omnipresent as the grain silos and just as silent. There was a rhythm to them, a storm and a quiet, a storm and a quiet. The bus driver kept her route steady, doors wheezing open and shut, children thundering up and down the aisle with the casual trust of people who believe adults can solve problems. Then she saw a sign on her route nailed to a post, letters shouting at her with the same black block cadence she knew too well. She stopped. She went to tear it down and found a trap behind the cardboard. A gun, hidden in a box, configured to fire if handled wrong. It didn't. She lived. The trap was disarmed, but the sound of the click that didn't happen lived on. A ghost of pressure on the trigger that could haunt a person when the wheat fields breathed and the wind skates rattled at dusk. Someone was arrested, a relative by marriage, convicted. His friends said he'd been framed. His enemies said justice had dragged its blunt net across a pond and finally caught a fin. He went to prison. The town exhaled, and then the letters kept coming. From the same hand, the same block letters, the same hunger for theater, postmarked while the convicted man was behind bars. If it was him, how? If it wasn't, who? Circleville shrank under an expanding lens. Everyone's eyes were microscopes now, faces pressed close to grain patterns and fence posts, to postmarks, to the tiny variations in how an R sat on the line. At night, the farmhouse roads felt longer. Porch lights cast honey-yellow puddles onto gravel, half-light that made everything beyond seem like it was leaning toward you. More letters arrived. "We see," they said. "We know." New targets were named. Old ones were revived. The writer's obsession wasn't just with sin, but with the dramatic function of its exposure, the way fear rearranged families like furniture. Holmes developed a new ritual. Check the lock, check the mailbox, check the night. The investigator in you wants the smoking gun, that perfect thread to pull the odd envelope glue, the fiber, the fingerprint. There were such threads. Some led somewhere, some unraveled in your hands. Experts talked about disguised handwriting, about how a person can torque the ordinary look of their language into something that lives between print and scrawl. The town talked about grudges, small-town calculus, the inventory of who might gain from a particular humiliation. A letter would arrive, a child's birthday party would go silent, a smile would stiffen at a church door. Years moved, not like a clean calendar flip, but like a ditch filling inch by inch with cold water. Some people left Circleville. Some stayed and built lives around what couldn't be solved, like farmers who build fences around sinkholes and quit walking that patch of land. The letters slowed, then sputtered, then stopped, or seemed to. A generation came up that knew the story the way children know a haunted house on the edge of town, its outlines sketched in retellings, with a darkness inside that felt less like an explanation than a permanent vacancy. The twist is that the writer's identity remains fog thick enough to disorient, thin enough to see faces in it if you want to. The man convicted always maintained innocence. The letters that arrived while he was in prison suggested either a conspirator or a mimic, and the possibility that the true power wasn't in being believed, but in making disbelief useless. To this day, Circleville has two versions. One where a single person did a cruel thing and was caught, and another where a community was taught that language itself can be weaponized anonymously, and that a place's most ordinary surfaces, mail, signs, the shape of an R, can be turned into a stage for terror so mundane it feels unstoppable.
Language itself can be weaponized, and terror hides in the ordinary. Every neighborhood has a story. In Denver, it began with a routine.
Genre: true crime divided by true horror. The old Denver house creaked the way old houses do, every plank a throat clearing. It was winter cold enough to keep milk on the back step, and the occupant, an elderly man with meticulous habits, had his life timed to the minute. Neighbors waved from porches and could set their watches by the way his lamp went out. Then, one night, the pattern broke. The lamp burned longer, then died early the next. A chill settled over the block, the kind that makes you step a little closer to your own door and turn the key faster. Police found the man dead, inside assaulted, the back door locked from within. It felt impossible. They searched the house the way you search a dream for logic. Closet doors flung open, curtain hems lifted, attic hatch tested. No footprints in fresh snow, no sign of forced entry. The room smelled of dust and old wool. A policeman ran his hand along a baseboard and came up with a streak of gray on his glove. They locked up and left into a night so clear it felt like it could shatter. Strange small things began to happen. Food went missing. A loaf heel, a slice of cheese, a chair that faced a slightly different angle in the morning, like someone had sat and carefully replaced it. The neighbor who held the spare key came in at noon one day with the mail and swore she heard air moving from somewhere it shouldn't, like a throat behind drywall. She told herself it was furnace noise, told herself a lot of things, and yet the house gained a new pronoun in everyone's sentences. Not it, but he or they, even when no one could explain why. They scoured the house again, slow as a prayer. In the bedroom closet was a panel, not much bigger than a folded newspaper. Behind it, a crawl space mottled with shadows. The first beam of the flashlight hit nothing but grime, but the second pass found two eyes, dulled by darkness and shock, set in a face so thin it looked carved from the idea of hunger itself. A man unfolded from the void with the terrible delicacy of someone who's learned to move without sound. He tried to bolt and tangled in his own limbs, weak from a diet of stolen bites and the kind of fear that burns more calories than work. It turned out he had been living above the house, crawling down when the occupant was out or asleep, emerging like a fold in a story to tiptoe through another person's life. He knew the creak map of the floors, the exact places where pressure went quiet. He went up with food and a pitcher of water like a ghost carrying offerings back to the mausoleum. They called him the Spider-Man. Not for agility, he had very little left, but for the awful fact that he'd constructed a web out of another man's routines and sat in it for months, waiting for moments of empty air. The neighborhood never learned to tell the tale without lowering their voices, as if the house could hear. Some called it a cautionary story about locks and windows and the folly of routines. Others couldn't get past one image, the inch of open closet panel in the darkness, a sliver of air between living and being lived above. There is a kind of horror that is supernatural, and there is a kind that is simply human proximity, the knowledge that a person can be hurt or haunted by someone only a sheet of plaster away. The house went on being a house. New people moved in and painted things light, and the floors kept their secrets under a glossy finish. The twist is how small the distance really was. Not blocks, not neighborhoods, not miles, just a handful of inches of wood and lath, a decade's worth of dust for insulation. The killer was not a stranger breaking in from the outside. He was inside already, learning the rhythm of another life until he could move in it like a second shadow. In daylight, the crawl space looked uninspired, a dark cupboard for pipes. At night, it was a stage, the hatch, an eyelid, the room, a lung. People like to believe that the boundary between safety and danger is a door you can lock. The Denver house reminds us it can just as easily be a panel you never thought to open, a breath you didn't think to listen for, a space the size of a person pressed between your ceiling and your fear.
Story 1. Code Blue.
The elevator doors sighed open onto Ward C. The smell hit me first chlorhexidine in warmed plastic, a thin ribbon of coffee that had been burning on a warmer since a previous life. It wasn't my first night shift, but it was my first at Street Augustine Community, a brick box of a hospital that sat between a shuttered grocery and a pawn shop. People came here when they didn't have the time or money to go anywhere else. They healed here, or they didn't, and both happened quietly. Patel? The charge nurse, Darnell, had shoulders so broad his navy scrubs looked painted on. He handed me a badge clip and a smile that didn't meet his eyes. We're light. 5 patients. You'll take C8 through C12. Lauren's on respiratory. Call her if you need a neb or if someone's CO2 tanks start acting like they don't want to live. He turned toward the nurse's station where a metal cage of clipboards and old Cardex cards wheezed open. You'll learn the rhythms, he added. Every unit's got them. C8 was post-op bowel resection, thin as a cut wire. C9 was end-stage COPD on 2 liters prongs. C10 had a trach and a daughter who called every hour on the hour. C11 slept like the dead. C12, my eyes snagged on the room number like a hangnail. Next to it, someone had penciled a circle around the 12 on the dry erase board and scrubbed at it so hard the laminate had a scar. You okay? Darnell asked. Fine, I said, and found a pen that worked. Rounds settled into their clatter. Vitals, meds, reposition, chart. Lauren appeared. Sharp bob, sharper eyes, a respirator slung over her shoulder like a purse. Vent check, she said, and her hands moved so confidently over C10's tubing, I envied it. At 2 a.m., the ward settled into the hush I'd learned to both love and fear. The coffee in the lounge tasted faintly metallic, but at least it was warm, and I wrapped my fingers around it until they remembered they were mine. The old Cardex drawer was misaligned, and when I shoved it closed, a file slipped free and clapped onto the floor. I stooped to scoop it up and found it wasn't a Cardex at all, but an ancient ledger that had survived on inertia. Street Augustine had gone digital years ago, but judges and nurses alike hoard paper. The pages were lined like a schoolboy's notebook, and down the left side, a hand had written dates, the time 317, again and again, and 3 letters, 12. The hairs rose along my forearms. The dates weren't every night. They weren't even every week, but they were regular every other Wednesday, except for 2 months ago, when 3 entries jostled close together like train cars about to collide. Find something good? Lauren asked from the doorway. A small smile twitched her mouth. Old notes, I said, shutting the ledger and tucking it back where I'd found it. Weird how much paper survives. She shrugged. This place keeps everything, even ghosts, she said. But her smile didn't reach her eyes either, and she was gone as quick as she'd come. I checked C12 at 2:45. Mr. Howland, a retired machinist with a jaw like a vice, slept on his side, mouth open. His monitor traced out a lazy sinus rhythm. His saline bag hung clear as a conscience. I noted his output and let the door seal close behind me with a rubbery kiss. At 3:10, the ward lights dimmed on their timer to the gloaming dim that makes everything feel underwater. Somewhere down the hall, an ice machine coughed. I documented meds given and queued orders for 4 a.m. labs. At 3:15, C9 coughed itself awake and then back to sleep. At 3:16, I told myself I was being dramatic. At 3:17, a chime ripped the quiet in half. C12. Heart rate dipping, then stuttering, then holding steady, like a child practicing a lie. I was through the door before I realized I'd moved, gloves on, eyes up. Mr. Howland's face had gone the yellow of cheap paper. His lips were dusky. The monitor drew a flat dout across the screen that bounced back into a rhythm when I shook his shoulder and called his name. Mr. Howland. Sir, can you open your eyes for me? He fought upward, confused. I scanned the room. Rails up, bed low, IV pump reading, saline 100 ml, HR. The bag label read 0.9% normal saline in a neat factory font. But when I squeezed the line and put the end near my nose, a sweetness ghosted the air. Not saline. Or saline that had been kissed by something that didn't belong. Lauren's head appeared behind me. Everything okay? His pressure dipped. I said, too quickly. Can you grab a fresh bag? This one smells off. She didn't roll her eyes exactly, but her mouth tightened. We don't smell fluids, Maya. But sure, I'll get you a new one. She was gone and back with a new bag before I'd finished checking pulse and capillary refill. Mr. Howland's face washed from yellow to a humid rose like a sunrise no one believed in. The old bag sat heavy in the trash, its plastic cloudy in the dim. Darnell popped in, as if tugged on a string. We good? We're okay, I said. We were not okay, but we're okay now. He looked at the trash. What's that? Saline, I said. But we don't smell fluids, he interrupted. Same line, same tone, as if they'd practiced it in a mirror. I'll note the event. You sit, drink water. Whatever this night tries to be, it isn't. Back at the station, my locker door had a new crease, a slight bend as if someone had leaned their weight against it. When I opened it, a sticky note clung to the inside. Red ink, block letters, a smell like cherry marker from grade school. 3 words, mind your counts. I stared at it so long it unfocused. When I closed my eyes, I saw the ledger's slanted dates. I saw 3/17. I saw the way the pump hadn't alarmed before the dip. An old unit trick, a machine silenced at the source. I folded the note and slid it behind my badge. You okay? Darnell asked, voice careful. Fine, I said, and lied because I needed the lie to get me through the rest of the night. At 4 a.m., an elderly woman in C9 woke and watched me draw blood. Is she still here? She whispered. Who? I whispered back. The lady who pinches the air shut, she said, and the effort of those words stole her breath. She comes on Wednesdays. It's Thursday, I said. Not for her, the woman said, and closed her eyes. By morning, the ward's lights were bright enough to bleach the night into something you could pretend wasn't real. New coffee steamed. New birds shouted outside. I dug the old ledger back out and ran my finger down the column of times. Every other Wednesday. 3/17. 12. 3 entries the month someone complained to administration about the Wednesday dips. The complaint's photocopy was paper-clipped behind a progress note, as if whoever clipped it together had wanted it found and hidden both at once. At shift change, my badge felt heavier. As I walked to the parking lot, sun making the asphalt wobble, I took the note from my badge and read it again. Mind your counts. It was a warning, or a threat, or both. It was also an answer to a question I hadn't asked out loud. Someone else was counting too.
In the city's forgotten basement, where rent is cheap, but the price is your soul.
The basement apartment smelled like damp laundry and old lemon cleaner, the kind of scent you get when someone is trying to convince you a place is clean instead of making it so. I was 31, 2 months into a freelance gig that might evaporate any day, and the price was right enough. I didn't ask the questions my mother would have. Jersey City, 1 window, painted shut, a door with 3 deadbolts. Safe, the landlord said, tugging each lock in turn so the metal clacked like a metronome. Why so many? I asked. Basement, she said. People worry. Her name was Mrs. Kowalski, hair like a dandelion and seed, slippers that whispered. She lived upstairs and walked like someone who had spent a lifetime walking softly. The ceilings were low enough I could lay my palm flat against them if I stood on my toes. Pipes spidered along joists and tangled gray veins. The bedroom had a single vent that wheezed warm air, and then none. But it was mine, with my futon, my desk, my mugs lined up like soldiers of tea along the counter. The first week, I thought I was doing well. I unpacked, I wrote, I learned that the upstairs neighbor had a dog whose nails tapped a rhythm across the boards. The deadbolts turned smooth as butter under my hand. On Tuesday, my milk tasted funny, but cheap milk always tastes like it learned nothing from its life. On Thursday, I couldn't find my blue shirt. I am not a man who loses things. I am the kind who makes piles and then memorizes them. The shirt wasn't on the chair, or under it, or draped over the curtain rod like a confession. I told myself I was stressed. I told myself I had worn it and put it in the hamper and just forgot. On Sunday night, a note appeared on my kitchen counter. Please keep it down at night. Some people have work in the morning. Neighbor. It wasn't taped. It wasn't under a magnet. It was just there. A folded square, block letters, no signature, like a TV note. The kind whose important quality is plausible deniability. I worked with headphones. The loudest thing I did at night was boil water. I slipped a reply under the upstairs door that read, in my neatest print, I'm very quiet. If I'm bothering you, please text or knock. I included my number. No one texted, no one knocked. On Wednesday, I woke at 3 a.m. to the feeling of being watched. There's no other way to put it. The apartment was a cave with a futon at its lip. The streetlight through the one window drew a rectangle on the ceiling, and in that dim I felt eyes. I lay still long enough to feel my heartbeat in my gums. Then I swung my legs over the side of the bed, stood, and turned on the light like a coward. No one was there. Of course no one was there. The hum of the fridge sounded like far-off traffic. The vent ticked as if cooling. I laughed out loud to make the apartment less quiet, and felt foolish when my laugh fell out of my mouth and died on the carpet. In the morning, I made coffee and a list. Work to do, groceries to buy, ask Mrs. K about the heat. I grabbed my keys from the bowl, except they weren't there. The bowl was empty. I found them 10 minutes later in the pocket of my backpack, a place I never put them. I chalked it up to fatigue, grabbed a bagel from the counter, and walked to the bodega where the owner had started greeting me as boss, the way men do who want your small talk more than your money. That night, another note. Seriously, stop dragging furniture at 2 a.m. Neighbor. I hadn't moved a chair. I hadn't even moved my mind. I held the paper up to the light. The fibers made a cloudy galaxy. On the back, a faint ridge of letters, as if the note had been written on top of another note at a kitchen table that had seen too many lists. I decided to knock on Mrs. Kowalski's door. She answered in a floral robe, lips pursed, eyes busy. Am I bothering anyone at night? I asked. Everyone hears everyone, she said. Old house, sound travels. I'm not dragging furniture, I said. I'm sleeping. She looked at my shoes, not my face. Do you cook? Sometimes smells go up. I boil water. She said, and closed the door softly. 2 nights later, the vent breathed hot, and then not, a sighing that had started to feel like another presence. I stood on a chair and unscrewed the grate. It was old, paint thick on its edges like icing. Behind it, a dark rectangle of duct. I shone my phone light inside and saw dust in a film of gray that had to be time itself. And 6 inches in, I saw something else. Paper. I reached in, fingers brushing the duck's cold ribs, and pulled out a small stack, a grocery receipt, a torn corner of a magazine, and a Polaroid. The white border had browned. The image was my window, my futon. Me, asleep, turned onto my side with my mouth slightly open in a way that made me hate myself. I dropped the photo. The room swayed. I picked it up with hands I couldn't convince to be steady and studied the grain. It wasn't a trick of reflection. It wasn't someone else's apartment that happened to be mine. The photo had been taken from the corner near the futon where there was no corner, no angle, no place to stand unless you were inside the wall. The next morning, I told Mrs. Kowalski someone had gotten into my apartment. Her mouth pinched. How? You have the only keys. Someone took a picture of me sleeping. Do you have a girlfriend? The question was needle sharp. No, I said. And even if I did, she wouldn't hide in the vents. Mrs. Kowalski's eyes went to the wall and back like a bead on a string. Old houses have spaces, she said. Utility chases, places for pipes and wires. Children get ideas. Children? Upstairs, she said. My niece's voice sometimes plays. In my walls? I said, the words tasting as unhinged as they sounded. Don't be dramatic, she said. This is a safe building. That night, I slid my dresser in front of the vent. Dramatic. Fine. I set my phone to record audio on the kitchen counter and tried to sleep. When I woke, the dresser was shifted an inch. Just enough to be undeniable if you knew where it had been, and deniable if you didn't. My phone recording was 57 minutes of refrigerator hum, and once, a breath that sounded like my own and was not. The airport run had paid well enough to make up for the lull between 2 and 3, that cold water hour when the city exhales everyone it has chewed and kept. Elena's Corolla smelled like sanitizer and pine, a clean that was honest because it didn't pretend to be more. The app pinged as she passed the toll stack pickup. 8 minutes away. Customer requested late pickup. Please flash hazards. She frowned. The flash hazards line was new. The address was a pin-off. Exit 17, industrial, delivery yards, and corrugated warehouses that did their real business at night when eyes were scarce. She had rules: no bars at closing, no dead zones where the pin floats in asphalt. But rules bend when rent is due, and the fare's surge multiplier blinked like a dare. She tapped accept and watched the route line draw itself into her night. The voice in her phone directed her off the highway and onto a service road that had forgotten what paint felt like. Sodium lights spaced themselves like a constellation someone had sketched while drunk. The air smelled like oil and old heat. She rolled her shoulders and turned down the true crime podcast she shouldn't have been listening to in the first place. The pin pulled her into a yard with a single gate open and a guard shack that was either empty or contained a person who had mastered the art of stillness. A sign on the chain link read, "Drivers, text on arrival." A local number. She texted, "Here for pickup. Gray Corolla." She did not add her plate. She never added her plate. A minute ticked. Another. Her hazards clicked their metronome into the quiet. Across the yard, a forklift moved between shadow and light, carrying nothing as if practicing. Her phone buzzed. A text bubble. "Come to Bay 4. No emoji. No name. The app still said, "Waiting for rider." She drove slowly, the gravel under her tires making a sound like bones settling. Bay 4 was a mouth in the side of a long, low building, a roll-up door half open, darkness inside like a promise. A figure in a reflective vest stepped into her beams and raised a hand. Not a wave, exactly. A stop. She lowered the window 2 inches. "Elena?" the figure said, voice muffled by the warehouse echo. "Pick up for Marcus," she said, reading from the app. The figure nodded. "Flash your hazards so we know you're you." "They're on," she said. The figure's head tilted as if listening to something she could not hear. "Can you pull closer?" he asked. She didn't. "Marcus can meet me here." A longer pause. Another head appeared in the dark behind the first. The forklift's engine coughed and died. The yard's gate made a sound like a lock, remembering it used to be used. Elena's artery of options narrowed. She glanced at the app. The stacked label had vanished. The screen now read, "New pickup," with a pin that floated 100 yards to the left, into a space that was fence and air. Her passenger rating twinkled 4.9 stars at her like a shrug. She put the car in reverse. The figure in the vest stepped forward and put a hand on the hood, fingers splayed, the threat as polite as it was real. He smiled and mouthed something she couldn't hear. She looked at his vest. No company logo. She looked at his hands. Clean. Not a yard worker's hands. She looked at the guard shack, still empty. She looked up, and that's when she saw the camera. It was mounted high on a pole, stamped with a logo she didn't recognize. The lens trained not on the yard, but on her car. A small black box below it blinked a red beat. Searching. Searching. Found. Her plate. Elena forced her breath slow. She kept her right thumb on the side button of her phone, feeling for the rhythm that would wake the emergency SOS without saying it. 5 presses. The world around her tightened, detail crisping. A pallet leaned near Bay 3, saran-wrap boxes stacked to a height that would hide a person and then some. The forklift sat with a key dangling from its ignition like a dare. The vest at her hood leaned down, his face at the level of her windshield frame, and she saw the edge of a tattoo at his throat. 3 perpendicular lines like the hash marks men carve into the world when they want to measure what they've taken. She smiled, an expression that felt like cracking. She lifted both hands where he could see them and mouthed, "Okay," making a slow show of putting the car in park. He stepped back. She tapped the phone. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The phone shivered in her hand as it silently dialed the only help that might arrive in time if time could mean anything here. "Just pull in," the second voice called from the shadows. "It's safer inside." Inside what? She did not ask. She cut the wheel right, the opposite of what they wanted, and drove a shallow arc that put the forklift between her and Bay 4. The vest's hand slapped metal as she passed. "Hey!" he shouted, surprise souring into anger. She accelerated. The gate ahead began to roll, slow as law. In her rear view, 2 more figures peeled out of night-like pieces of it had decided to walk. One raised an object to his mouth radio, or something more permanent. The pole camera blinked faster. There's a trick her EMT instructor had taught her before she dropped out of that dream and into this reality. When you can't be stronger, be weirder. People let you do things they don't understand. She flicked off her lights, killed the hazards, and laid on her horn, a long animal wail that bounced between the buildings and made the guard shack's windows shiver. She yanked the wheel left at the last second, skirting a puddle that wasn't a puddle at all, but an oil pond that would have spun her like a toy. The gate squealed open another foot. Not enough. "Stop the car!" the vest shouted, closer now. Something clanged off her trunk. A metal drum kicked into anger. 911. "What is your emergency?" a voice said into her ear, hushed by the phone's tiny speaker. "Rideshare driver. Industrial yard. Exit 17, she said. Words clipped fast. "I'm boxed in. They've got a plate scanner. 2, no. 3 men. No logos. Stay on the line. Are you in your vehicle?" "Yes." "Doors locked?" "Yes." "Windows up?" "Yes." "Is there a way out?" A space there between a parked semi and a stack of pallets, thin as a rumor. She threaded the Corolla through like she had been born to sew. In the mirror, a man in a vest tripped and went down on one knee, his hand scraping sparks off the concrete. The guard shack door opened at last, and the man stepped out, not in a vest but in a t-shirt that read staff in letters so generic they may as well have been a joke. He held a clipboard. He held nothing else. He watched as if this were television. "The gate?" the 911 voice asked. "Closing," Elena said. "I'm making my own." And then the world sharpened further because someone to her right took 2 running steps and threw something at her window. It hit with a crack, spiderwebbing the glass into beauty and threat. The Corolla lurched. She tasted copper. She aimed for the seam in the fence where 2 panels met like teeth and prayed that whoever had ordered the fence had ordered it cheap. The car hit. Metal sang. The chain link bowed. And for a second she thought she'd made a terrible calculation, that the world was full of fences you couldn't bend at 30 miles an hour. Then the bolts sheared, the mesh yawned, and the Corolla spilled out into night, her front bumper howling its disagreement with physics. Behind her, men shouted. Ahead, the service road curved back to the highway, a thin thread to the city's fabric. The phone in her ear said, "Stay with me." And she said, "I'm here." And the truth of that felt like a small miracle. She didn't look back. She knew better. She also knew she'd see that pole camera in her sleep, the red blink, the hungry lens, the way it had recognized her without ever knowing her name. "911. What's your emergency?" Caller. Male. Breathless. "I'm on I-17 near mile marker 197. There's a car on the shoulder with the door open. Someone's waving me down." Dispatcher. "Are you stopped?" Caller. "Yeah, I pulled behind them. Hazards on." I don't see... Hold on, hello? You okay? Footsteps on gravel. Distant trucks roar past. Unknown voice, faint, from darkness. Help. Please. Caller, calling out. I've got a phone. I'm calling for you. Where are you? A metallic tap. The caller's voice tightens. Caller. Something's wrong. I don't see a person, just the door swinging. There's a jacket on the ground. Dispatcher. Sir, return to your vehicle. Lock the doors. Caller. Wait, there's a rope tied to the guardrail. What the f... A sudden thud. The line crackles. Silence. Then the caller whispers. Lower now. Caller. Someone's under the car. Dispatcher. Sir, get back in your vehicle now. Caller. They're crawling. Hey, back off. Scream.
They're crawling! Hey!
Then the unmistakable crunch of boots on ballast. Quick. Cut to black. Radio chatter. A patrol unit approaches, dashcam catching wind-blown debris, hazard flashers strobing. The cruiser pulls up behind a white pickup and a dark sedan with an open driver's door. Timestamp 2:17. Trooper Hayes, into radio. Unit 24 on scene at MM 197. 2 vehicles. Open door. No parties visible. He steps out. Gravel crunches. His flashlight cuts through the dark. The sedan's cabin. Empty. Windshield cracked with starburst. A hood-slung rope running under the chassis to the guardrail. The rope's end is frayed. Hayes. Who set this? He moves to the white pickup, still idling. Driver's door open. Keys in. On the ground, a wallet, a folded trucker's map, and a phone face down. Screen. Spidered. Hayes calling out. Sir. State police. If you can hear me, call out. The wind answers, carrying a distant clink metal. Brushing metal. Rhythmic. He pans his light over the guardrail. Fresh footprints in the grit. 2 sets. One with deep tread. One bare, heel-struck, toes splayed. The bare prints go to the guardrail and stop. Hayes leans over the barrier. The drop is 10 feet to a drainage ditch. Flashlight beam finds crushed weeds, a torn flannel snagged on rebar, and drag marks across damp earth. Radio. Unit 12 en route. ETA 6 minutes. Hayes. Into radio. I've got signs of a struggle. Possible ambush setup. Start another unit in EMS. A quiet moan, carried from below. He freezes. Listen mode. Another clink chains. He angles the light and catches it. A chain hooked to the guardrail support, its end disappearing into the cattails. Hayes. Hello. Are you injured? Do not move. I'm coming around. He follows the access path to the ditch. The chain slides, as if drawn by someone unseen. He stops. His light finds a milk crate set under the guardrail, like a step. The rope from the hood passes through the crate and knots. A crude snare. Hayes. Soft. To himself. They wanted him to bend down. He scans the weeds. There an eye glints. A figure rises, then sinks back, a person lying on their stomach, hands bound behind them. The figure shakes their head violently. Hayes steps closer, then sees it. Another set of eyes. Lower. Inside the cattails. 2 still. Not eyes, bottle caps glued to a stick. A decoy. A twig snaps behind him. He pivots. Light up. The beam freezes a silhouette at the top of the ditch, backlit by highway sodium glow. Tall. Hooded. Bare feet gray with dust. The figure holds a length of chain loosely, like a tail. Hayes. Firm. State police. Drop it. Silence. The figure tilts their head. Slow. Avian. Then they smile, or the shadow makes a mouth of it, and they step backward, melting behind the guardrail. Hayes climbs fast, breath loud in his mic. He clears the top. Nothing. Just his cruiser and the 2 vehicles winking red amber in the wind. The chain lies slack by the crate. His light sweeps. Empty road, shoulders stretching. Endless. Backup arrives. Unit 12 and 36. They triangulate the ditch. Locate the bound person male. Late 30s the caller. ankles tied, duct tape residue on wrists, hypothermic. He keeps repeating, hoarse. They were under the car. They were smiling. Don't get low. Don't get low. Paramedics load him. He grabs Hayes' sleeve, collar. They threw pebbles at my bumper. Then I saw the hand. I thought, they bumped my car when I bent down. I heard a laugh under the engine. Hayes squeezes his shoulder. Later, daylight. Investigators walk the shoulder. Photographs. The sedan's VIN links to a car stolen 2 days prior. In the trunk, an empty gas can and one glove. Along the fence line, they find small piles of crushed glass and nails, set like caltrops. A quarter-mile north, in a culvert, a nest, blankets, food wrappers, and several lengths of rope coiled like snakes. In the dirt, prints of bare feet and knees. A tow truck driver who works that stretch points to a worn path. Driver, I've had calls out here. Flat tires. I thought it was debris. Now I'll call it in and wait. Night. Hayes drives past 197 again. Slower this time. The guardrail reflects his headlamps. His radio murmurs. He glances into the ditch. The cattails sway. He imagines bare feet on cold gravel. A grin below the chassis of any car foolish enough to stop. As he passes the mile marker, the dash cam catches a flicker on the shoulder. A jacket, lying just so, sleeve raised by the wind as if waving, cut to black. The wind keeps blowing.